Sometimes destiny arrives not with loud footsteps, but as a gentle breeze, noticed only by the most sensitive souls. The story of Shannon Hoon is one of those. A tale of ambition, hope, and a flight that ended all too soon. In the early 1990s, Shannon Hoon's name echoed everywhere. His band, Blind Melon, exploded onto the music scene with No Rain, a tender ode to loneliness and inner sadness. Under the soft melody and the image of the little bee girl from the music video, millions of people saw a reflection of themselves. But, as so often happens, the bright lights of the stage concealed a deep and growing shadow. Shannon was born and raised in modest Indiana, where his childhood was filled with echoes of distant decades. The music of the 60s and 70s called to him. The Beatles, Grateful Dead, John Lennon, like older brothers he had never met but was drawn to. Bob Dylan whispered to him about freedom and the search for meaning. These melodies became his heart's map, his comfort, and his guiding star. When it came time to embark on his own creative path, young Hoon made an unexpected choice. In 1985, he became the lead vocalist for a glam metal band called Stiff Kitten. Bright makeup, teased hair, tight costumes. There was a kind of magic to that stage presence, a lesson in how to command an audience and capture the emotions of a crowd. It was during this time, barely into his 20s, that he wrote Change, a song that would later prove to be pivotal in his life. At 23, leaving behind the familiar streets of his small town, he journeyed westward, to where the crimson sun melts into the Pacific Ocean each evening, to the mirage of fame, Los Angeles. A city where hope and disappointment lived side by side, where dreamers driven by ambition crowded every street corner. In those years, Los Angeles pulsed with the glam scene that had catapulted bands like Guns N' Roses to stardom. Shannon was still drawn to its energy and boldness, but within his heart, a different kind of music had begun to emerge. More honest, more vulnerable. Then one night, at one of countless parties where alcohol mixed with ambition, he performed Change. In the crowd that evening were Brad Smith and Roger Stevens, fellow musicians, also newcomers to this city of traps. They were struck by his voice, sincere, fragile, yet powerful. There was something in it that could not be taught or imitated. From that moment, their minds were made up. Shannon had to be their frontman. And so the story of Blind Melon was born. A story of music that offered hope to those who hid their sorrow behind smiles. Of a boy from Indiana who became the voice of an entire generation. Of a man who reached the heights of fame, yet never found peace within himself. In those years, before the world hid behind glass smartphone screens, when every moment had to be caught by hand and captured on a heavy, humming video camera, Shannon Hoon had already learned how to preserve memories. From the early 90s, from his first steps in Los Angeles, he relentlessly filmed his life. Every rise, every mistake, every breath. The camera was his diary, his companion on a long and unpredictable journey. Shannon arrived in Los Angeles with a heart full of dreams, driven by relentless energy and that reckless fire that burns only in those willing to give everything to music. Guitarist Roger Stevens would later describe him with a slight grin. He was a madman from the day I met him. But behind that madness was a unique magic. Leading a band requires not only a voice but a certain kind of charisma, and Shannon had it, intense and contagious. His wild, sometimes untamable nature became the driving force behind Blind Melon. Los Angeles in the early 90s was a city of deceptive hopes, but Shannon had no intention of giving up. His determination grew stronger, to gather the dream team, to land a record deal, and finally step onto the big stage. Fate brought him together with two equally driven musicians, guitarist Christopher Thorne and drummer Glenn Graham. They started playing in small clubs, writing songs. Their songs, filled with something fragile, sincere, and real. After recording a demo, they probably did not expect luck to arrive so quickly. One day, their tape found its way into the hands of an attorney from Capitol Records. The music struck a chord, deeply sending chills. A contract was offered almost immediately. Among the tracks on that demo were future gems: Tones of Home, Paper Scratcher, Dear Old Dad. However, The excitement of signing was soon tempered by the harsh reality of studio work. Together with producer David Briggs, they began recording their debut EP, The Sipping Time Sessions. But the further they went, the more they realized something was missing. The sound was too smooth, too polished. It lacked the raw, untamed energy that was born during their rehearsals and live performances. They wanted to sound real, and the studio tape was offering only a shiny shell. Yet, in the midst of these struggles, an unexpected gift came Shannon's way. While the band wrestled with finding their sound, he reconnected with an old friend of his sister's who had also moved to Los Angeles from their hometown in Indiana. That friend was none other than Axl Rose, the lead singer of the legendary Guns N' Roses. And through this new twist of fate, new doors began to open for Shannon. In the heart of Los Angeles' explosive music scene of the late 1980s and early 1990s, the fate of a young man named Shannon Hoon was quietly taking shape. Even before his own band, Blind Melon, made a name for itself, Hoon's voice was already echoing through radios across the world. He had the rare fortune of becoming part of a massive rock saga, contributing backing vocals to legendary Guns N' Roses tracks like The Garden, Live and Let Die, and, of course, November Rain. His voice blended seamlessly with Axl Rose's on the hit Don't Cry, and his face briefly appeared in the video that conquered MTV. A few live performances with Guns N' Roses cemented his reputation as an artist worth watching. But this was only the beginning. Los Angeles, drowning in metal, glam, and the early waves of grunge, was more of a temporary stop than a true home for Blind Melon. The band longed for a different sound, less aggressive, more soulful, almost psychedelic. After a few unsuccessful recording sessions for their EP The Sippin' Time Sessions, they made a difficult but necessary decision: to leave Los Angeles behind and relocate to Durham, North Carolina, far from the crashing guitars and the chaotic glamour of the West Coast. It was in the calm of Durham, surrounded by ancient trees and the humid southern air, that the songs began to take form, songs that would eventually make up their debut album. The band worked under the careful guidance of Rick Parashar, who had already made a name for himself producing Pearl Jam's debut. In 1992, Blind Melon released their self-titled album, and deep inside, Hoon held on to hope for recognition, for success, for a light at the end of a long tunnel. But what greeted them was silence. The early singles failed to catch fire. Even Tones of Home, which seemed like a strong contender, couldn't break into the charts. Then came No Rain, a tender song about depression, about longing for a light that never seems to appear. At first, it too was swallowed by indifference. But soon, a force unique to the 90s took over MTV. The video for No Rain, featuring the now iconic girl in the bee costume, whose lonely dance melted the hearts of millions, went viral long before the word viral even existed. Suddenly, Blind Melon was everywhere. Their songs played non-stop. Their faces appeared on magazine covers, and festival stages swung open their doors. Yet, as often happens, fame brought with it something darker, something dangerous and intoxicating. The doors to the rock and roll lifestyle flew wide open, leading to endless parties, alcohol, drugs, and the exhaustion of constant touring. Over the next 2 years, Blind Melon performed alongside giants like Neil Young and the Rolling Stones. But for Hoon, this new life quickly became a personal battle, a fight against himself. Fortunately, there was one constant in his life: Lisa Kuss, a childhood friend from his hometown. She remained his anchor amidst the chaos of fame, often serving as his only reminder of simple human values. But even she couldn't always protect him from his inner demons. Hoon checked into rehab multiple times, each visit an attempt to break free from his destructive cycle. In the spring of 1994, he once again sought treatment. And when, in July of 1995, his daughter Nico Blue was born, it seemed like everything was changing. Her birth became a beacon of hope, a cleansing moment. Shannon wanted to be a good father. He wanted a fresh start. It seemed as if the darkness was finally retreating. But rock and roll rarely lets go of its children without a fight. The separation from his daughter was a pain that gnawed at him from within. Deep in his heart, a small spark of hope remained. Hope that distance might help him heal, gather strength, and break free from the familiar comfort of drugs. This was a time of new struggles and new hopes, as the band prepared to move to New Orleans and record their long-awaited second album. The studio welcomed them with the warmth of southern nights and the rich, spiced air of Louisiana. Here, surrounded by the sounds of banjos, mandolins, and brass horns, Soup was born, a unique creation that unveiled new dimensions of their artistry. The album's opening track, Galaxy, made its way onto the Billboard charts, reaching the 25th spot. For a young band, it was a respectable start, but the label expected more. They were hoping for another carefree, all-encompassing hit like No Rain, but Soup had no such song. Sales were slow, and the music videos failed to gain the same momentum. At the same time, the band's frontman, Shannon Hoon, had just left rehab. His return to music was fragile like glass. Some said he wasn't ready to face the stage again, while others argued that touring was essential for promoting the album. A fragile compromise was reached. A special counselor would accompany the band on tour, someone who could support Shannon in his most difficult moments. But the illusion quickly crumbled. Within a week, the counselor was dismissed. The band was left on their own once again. They did everything they could to preserve the energy for the audiences who came hoping to feel that spark, that magic. On the night of October 20th, 1995, they performed at Numbers, a club in Houston. Shannon stepped onto the stage, but something was wrong. Guitarist Christopher Thorne later recalled that Shannon had once again given in to temptation before the show. He was high. It affected everything: his voice, his eyes, the music. The following day, they were scheduled to play in New Orleans, the city that had become their second home while recording Soup. After the disappointing show in Houston, Shannon was filled with bitterness and frustration. The heavy weight of loneliness and unfulfilled expectations pressed down on him once more. Far from his family, far from his beloved daughter, exhausted by his internal struggle, he made a decision that would prove to be fatal. That night, he tried to drown his anxieties in the usual whirlwind: noise, alcohol, blinding lights, quick drags, and an endless hunt for the next hit. After the show in New Orleans, worn down by his inner demons, Shannon Hoon disappeared into the city's humid night air, as if dissolving into a hazy mist of his own fears and desires. The music, the stage, the fame, all of it was there, but inside remained a void he never quite knew how to fill. By early morning, as the first rays of sunlight timidly broke through the foggy southern sky, he returned to the band's tour bus. Without a word, he climbed into his bunk, hoping for sleep, for oblivion, for escape, even if only for a little while. No one would see him awake again. Later that morning, when the sound engineer entered the bus to wake Shannon for soundcheck, he was met with a grim discovery. The paramedics arrived quickly, but there was nothing more they could do. At 28 years old, Shannon Hoon's life had come to an end. Suddenly, yet in a way that somehow felt tragically inevitable. The brief but brilliant journey of Blind Melon had always danced dangerously along the edge. Even in his youth, Shannon had turned to marijuana, which seemed like a harmless companion in his search for inspiration. But heavier substances followed. Hallucinogens that fueled his performance at the iconic Woodstock of 1994, and alcohol binges that offered momentary relief from the turmoil buried deep within his soul. His fragile body and tormented mind could not withstand the battle. He was laid to rest in Dayton, Indiana, on the soil where his dreams of music were first born. Friends and bandmates standing by his grave sensed that not only a life had ended, but also a unique magic, the magic of Blind Melon, shaped by his voice, his reckless energy, and his exposed, vulnerable spirit. His tombstone bears words from the band's song Change, a somber reminder that change does not always bring salvation. In 1996, after his passing, Blind Melon released a compilation titled Nico, named after Shannon's daughter, who was only 13 weeks old when he left. The album stands as a final farewell, a collection of rough cuts, demos, and rare recordings where his charisma and artistry still pulse. Among them is a haunting version of Steppenwolf's The Pusher, to which Shannon added his own verses, as if trying to leave one last confession to the world before fading away for good. His life was always on the edge, caught between the bright lights of fame and the dark pull of personal demons. Shannon Hoon, the frontman of Blind Melon, possessed a rare gift that's hard to fully capture in words. His voice carried a raw honesty, as if his very soul was exposed in every note. In the early 1990s, he became both a symbol and a casualty of his generation. Shannon never tried to hide his struggles. The demons that haunted him often gained the upper hand. And yet, even in those darkest moments, he would reach for his camera. Filming became an obsession, turning his everyday life into a kind of personal documentary. A chaotic collage of laughter, music, arguments, rehearsals, drugs, and madness. He filmed himself, his friends, the band, as if afraid that, without the camera, it might all simply vanish into the fog of his mind. Years later, in 2020, those tapes came back to life. The documentary All I Can Say allowed the world to once again look into the eyes of this complex, fragile man, to witness his genius, his pain, and his journey. The film served as a kind of farewell to one of the most unique and vivid figures of the early 90s. But not every moment was captured on tape. One of the most infamous incidents took place in the summer of 1993 on stage at the Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver. The crowd, over 13,000 people, expected the usual show, but witnessed something entirely different. One fan later recalled thinking Shannon was wearing a beige suit. The truth was far more shocking. He walked on stage completely naked. In his drug-fueled state, this may have seemed like a joke, a statement, or an act of liberation. But when he began relieving himself on stage, and even toward the audience, the crowd erupted in outrage. The concert ended as quickly as it had begun: arrest, charges, and public shame. Yet despite these lows, Blind Melon's music continued to resonate. Their debut album sold over 3 million copies and achieved quadruple platinum status. The band earned 4 Grammy nominations, and the music video for No Rain became a cultural icon of its time. Bright, touching, and full of innocent joy. After Shannon's death, the band made several attempts to reinvent itself, but his memory lived on, not simply as a rock star, but as a fragile soul who longed for freedom, yet often drowned in his own fears. In 2015, years after his passing, Blind Melon returned to Shannon's hometown of Lafayette. On New Year's Eve, something extraordinary happened. His daughter, who had just turned 20, took the stage. She performed Change, the very first song her father ever wrote. That moment was more than just a performance, it was a delicate bridge between past and present, between the pain of loss and the hope of carrying life forward.